welcome everyone. Appreciate you joining the session today. Today we're going to talk about how this team here, MindPoint Group and Noname, has been working together to expedite a process for delivering a hardened and compliant software stack for the U.S. federal government and commercial and highly regulated markets. We have Mark Bolwell here. He's from MindPoint Group. Edgar Ortiz, who is a director at Noname, and myself, Daren Presbitero. I'm a solutions architect focused on U.S. federal government markets. So, Mark, why don't we start off by having you tell us a little bit about what MindPoint Group does as it relates to FedRAMP, ATOs, and hardening, more particularly within the U.S. federal space.
Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, so I'm Mark Bolwell. I work for MindPoint Group. I'm the principal automation engineer working on the project with Noname. And MindPoint Group is a well-known and experienced 3PAO. So it's a third-party assessment organization helping clients and organizations get into that federal space. So either by advising them or actually assessing them themselves. But obviously we can't do both, but we do advise and assess. It's not the area in which I work in MindPoint. I actually work on a side area called Untitled Lockdown, which really coexists with FedRAMP and making sure people can work towards compliance and making sure the platforms are working in a FedRAMP compliant area. In this particular project, it worked very differently. We're working with a product called Untitled Lockdown, which is MindPoint's open source platform. Obviously, there's a level where we can work with clients to make sure it's very bespoke to work with them. We've worked really closely with the teams and developments at Noname, and we've designed a host system fully compliant with STIG, which is the Security Technical Implementation Guide brought out by this part of the DoD to make sure it's hardened to a very secure and a best practices level. That enabled us to push through with the automation pipelines and platforms with Noname to get their platform up and running. So that's a bit about us and where we are.
Hey, Mark, you and MindPoint Group, you folks also are contributors to GitHub, free open source software, right? You folks have a lot of scripts. I mean, that's actually how we found you, was Ansible Lockdown and, just a lot of those scripts that you folks are freely providing to industry to help harden and secure their platforms and reduce that attack surface. Is that correct, Mark?
Yeah, 100%. So all the platforms we give out are open source initially. So people want to use them, understand them, work, see how they work. They're available. I think we have around about 57 repositories right now, which we manage and maintain purely for people to just download and use if they want to. And obviously we do have that commercial aspect if people require assistance or help in what is obviously quite a minefield of it getting into those compliance for areas and federal space.
Mark, just a quick minute also to elaborate on this. We obviously are a vendor, manufacturer, and we've been engaging you to help us harden our product. But what are some of the things that you're typically engaged with on the customer-facing side? What kind of engagements do you find yourself in?
So from the team which I work in, very similar to this, helping clients get into that compliance area, while you can turn around and download and look at a best practices guide. Try and make sure that when you implement it, it doesn't break what you currently have is quite another minefield. STIG itself is probably 300 plus controls, so 300 plus changes on your system, which any one of those can have an impact on how your system runs and performs and delivers the product you want it to deliver. We also do a lot of other automation as we've worked with Noname, working on other automation platforms. So we're using Ansible, we're using Jenkins, we're using Packer, we're using Terraform, all those things to try and help sure we can be as efficient, effective, and consistent as possible in any delivery we're giving to anyone.
Great. Thank you, Mark.
No problem at all. It's been fun.
So Edgar, let's kick it over to you. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and, more importantly, why Noname decided to invest in people like myself and my team in addressing the U.S. federal market?
Well, thanks, Daren. I'm Director of Solution Architecture here at Noname for the East and Public Sector team. I have the unique perspective of having seen Noname grow from employee number 32 when I joined to now over 250 plus employees, 100 plus customers deployed globally, which includes not just commercial, but also working with 3 of the 5 largest US telcos, 2 of the 5 largest pharmaceutical companies, major global financial insurance consumer, and other entertainment leaders. So this has been quite a blessing for me, seeing the company grow in the last 2 years. And within that, the reason we invested in Fed is, as you're growing any business, there's an immediate need to support the Fed mission. And many of our agencies and our goals and what we're trying to do at Noname aligns very well to the mission at many of our federal agencies. So it was a natural progression of our goals as a business, and so it was a natural no-brainer. And I'm always happy to see you, Daren, and the great work you've done with MPG and delivering this OVA for our customers. I'm seeing a little bit too, as a side effect of the work we've done here, is that it's starting to trickle into our commercial customers as well, because many of the commercial customers are asking us for many of the same stringent security requirements that we're seeing in the public sector. Those like banks and other financial institutions have very stringent, being in a highly regulated market, they have those same stringent requirements. So as a benefit of the work we've done here, all that's trickled into the broader solution at Noname, and we've created this great synergy where it's just simply elevated the quality of the deliverables that we're giving to our customers.
Great. And Edgar, you hit on a good point, being that, the commercials really starting to ask questions around how are you hardening your product? Can you work on a CIS benchmarked or a STIG benchmark system? And what I'm seeing is, as I sit in on some of these commercial calls, a lot of these folks are actually coming from federal agencies. Their background is they were in the military, maybe they were in IT, while they were in uniform, or they were a civil servant, they retired, and now they're showing up in banks, pharma, and a lot of them are starting to bring that those years of operationalizing cybersecurity, which the federal government's been doing a lot of, with them. And so we're hearing questions like, "Hey, how do you map to NIST cybersecurity framework?" So just to your point, right? There's a lot of beneficiaries around a hardened system.
Yeah, and I think some of that too is just the mature, how cybersecurity as an industry is maturing, as the risk across many organizations is starting to be recognized as not just a capital and operating expense, and is something that needs to be addressed and across multiple industries. And part of that too is bringing that same ethos into an organization and elevating cybersecurity as a primary need.
Yeah, I agree. Cyber risk is definitely a boardroom topic these days.
Yeah. So Daren, I mean, I've seen you put in so much work in the last 6 months here with Mark. Well, I'd love to hear. I've seen it firsthand, of course, because we talk all the time. But what are some of the challenges that you all face as you worked on building this, along with our market presence within the Fed, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, it was definitely a labor of love, but not because of where I'm at and the company I'm with and the people I'm with. It's this is a hard problem to solve, and I think Mark, you'll walk us through some of the process that's involved in actually hardening software and an appliance. But I will say that I've been doing this. A little bit about my background. I've been working with the U.S. Fed space for about 22 years now. I spent first 7 years on site as a contractor. So I got to learn what it takes to be boots on the ground, embedded with the troops in the trenches. And then came out and started working with OEM vendors such as Noname. So this is my 5th OEM vendor that I've been with. And what I typically focus on is helping that vendor with a go-to-market strategy within the federal space. And what that means is typically there's a business line of effort, a sales line of effort, which includes marketing, and then a product or engineering/sales engineering line of effort. And I typically find myself on the engineering, sales engineering, product development side of the house. So it's no surprise that I ended up here at Noname, helping forge a path around the product deliverable for Fed. But what I've typically find, at least in the past 4 companies I've been with, is that the product, the hardening of the product, the ability to get what we call an ATO, or an authority to operate and operationalize in a system, a federal agency system, typically that's lagging the sales motion. So you'll have this huge upfront investment by, executive leadership, board saying we need to invest in Fed. And usually what they'll do is they'll hire a bunch of salespeople, sales engineers, a director, a VP of federal, and the sales engine will be, just in overdrive. The problem is, though, and typically with small startup companies, you have a limited pool of really good developers. Most of the features that are coming in are more focused on commercial customers. And then as a part of the federal organization, I come in and go, hey, we need 100 new features, and they're all related mostly to federal compliance. And so, none of this has anything to do with how cool our product is and whether we can solve their use case. And here's some other things we need in order to flesh out those use cases. These are all just boring, run-of-the-mill hardening feature requests, such as, hey, can you can you flip this switch and enable FIPS? And then, of course, as we all know, things start breaking, right? So, it was really, I think, when I came here, I wanted to change the name of the game. I didn't want to end up a year, 2 years down the line where our salespeople and our sales team start leaving, partners start losing momentum or losing confidence in our ability to execute because the product just wasn't there, right? And it's not just me. I'm here, luckily I live right outside of the Beltway in DC, and I know a lot of people that work for OEM companies. So it's a big problem. It's systemic across OEMs. Sales team fully engaged, marketing presence, partners, but then the product just hasn't been delivered. So what I wanted to do, and what Edgar, you remember us beating that drum, was, hey, let's come up with all of the hardening requirements for what's required to be operationalized. And then let's prioritize these requirements in a way in which we can slowly insert them into our product development pipeline. We probably, I don't know, Edgar, what do we have? Like 2 quarters, 3 quarters of feature requests?
About 3/4.
Right? So we probably had dozens upon dozens of features already in the pipeline.
Yeah. And I'll never forget the moment of, I'm going to call it a moment of clarity, where it's like, oh wow, like this is going to be a huge investment, and it's a testament to the energy and commitment and the number one value at Noname, which is pedal to the metal and commitment to our customers, that we were able to deliver these capabilities in the time frame that we needed to address the market.
And I appreciate that support, Edgar, because we had a dedicated product manager and engineering team for Fed once we were done. But it took selling, it took internal selling. There were some cultural things we had to work through. This was a cultural shift as much as it was an engineering task. And Edgar, so thank you for that. We really had to go out and break bread with people and get things moving here. But it was really cool because once we got everyone engaged, the machine just was revving. And it was really cool because at one point we even saw that the product was starting to get ahead of the sales motion, and we had to start whipping the sales team to start catching up with us. You remember that, Edgar, right?
Yep.
So that was really cool. And what was really awesome is I remember just engaging with customers and just feeling super confident that, look, we are FIPS enabled, we are fully hardened per STIGs. You can deploy us. We will not compromise your FedRAMP cloud environment for people who have FedRAMP software today. We won't compromise your ATO. The change request should be easy. We're already, even today, seeing some reciprocity happening between agencies. So it just made things really, really easy for our customer to consume our product. The other thing, too, and the other reason why I came over to Noname was we were the only API security vendor a year ago when I first came on board that could deploy 100% on premise without any reliance on cloud connectivity or reach back out to the cloud. That includes our full capabilities of machine learning. All of that is on-prem. And what that means is we can deploy in federal agencies that are even completely isolated and disconnected from the internet. It means that we didn't have to go through the entire costly and timely process of getting FedRAMP authorized. Now, we do offer a SaaS capability for or deployment option on the commercial side. And that is something that we're going to be working with MindPoint Group as a 3PAO assessor to help us through here next. But this showed me with an on-prem solution that we could get from 0 to 60 very, very quickly. Still was difficult, this entire process, but we got here.
Well, none of it. So I talked about that attitude and that energy that engineering brings, and none of that, of course, would have been successful without good partners like Mark here. So bringing it back to Mark a little bit, Mark, just walk us through what goes into building a hardened product for highly regulated industries, like we just did.
It's a great question.
This is a great question, actually. One of the things that we see quite a lot of is that, as you've mentioned earlier, it's not just federal. We've seen this across the board now. A lot of people want to have this perfect build or a secure build or a really good design to start the base from. From this point, working with Noname and the guys in the development team have been fantastic. We worked very, very closely together. A lot of information going backwards was very fast, as you've mentioned. In this case, we took it back to the drawing board and designed the operating system from the ground up, working out what the requirements were for Noname, for the platform itself and how it wants to run, and the host operating system. So we designed the host operating system around how the Noname requirements were. Then we started to work through on the Noname requirements, all minimalizing everything, so everything down as to the smallest footprint we could possibly be. Minimal packages, minimal installations. It's just really best practice from the ground up, which means that you're in a much better starting place. You have a full log of what's changed. Everything's version controlled. It's all auditable through the whole pipeline process. So that's the first stage before we even start hardening, is getting that base down. But once you had that base going, it really helped us to accelerate further forward with Noname, how it works with the platform, what does and doesn't work with hardening. So a lot of things you'll find with hardening, as mentioned earlier, is that you'll enable a certain feature or turn off a certain feature, and that has a knock-on effect to multiple areas. So we've had to get to know the Noname platform, what requirements that has on the operating system, and vice versa. And where we're not able to meet those requirements for one reason or another, we then start to document, put in mitigations, try and work around how those things can work. So we'd have the OS build, we'd have the prerequisites installed, so only what's actually required, not just press next and install everything. It's literally the bare minimum to keep it as clean as possible. Then we go and harden the whole platform. So part of the hardening using the Ansible lockdown product is we would get on system, install the prerequisites, because there will be some around security Linux and things like that, security enhanced Linux. We'd audit the system to see what the state of the system was before we even started. Then we go around remediating and making those changes requirements in line with what Noname requirements were. So in this case, we'd have things that we'd have to turn off because Noname wouldn't allow us to have that running because of the way Noname works, because of the information you need to pull back in. We'd put in mitigations elsewhere to make sure it wasn't available any other way of doing things. So once we'd done that, we then installed the Noname product with hardened system. The system was hardened before we put Noname on the box. So we know for a fact that the system was completely hardened at 100% and turned things off one by one. That was probably the longest part of the process. But now that's repeatable. That whole pipeline we've written with you guys and the whole workflow we have end to end is completely, virtually hands off. No human error can be now interned. Everything's audit controlled. Everything's version controlled. We now have the whole pipeline end to end, hardened, coming out with a stick with consistent results, consistent across the board. Again, at the end of it, we then run another audit. So that audit tells you, before we did all the hardening, we'd have, 100 controls we need to work on. At the end of it, we have an expected 10 that we need to be aware of, make sure we've mitigated or documented. And one of the big things we did for the first time with Daren, was an attestation report. So that gave us the ability to then provide you the STIG IDs of what wasn't being met or wasn't adhering exactly to what's documented in the STIG, and then give you the workaround we've put in, either mitigation or it doesn't apply, but you had a documented process to go to your clients or any client and to say, we don't meet these parts, or we've mitigated more than these parts, and here's why, and exactly line for line what we've done to try and get around those things. Now, this is the fastest process I think we've ever done from the ground up. But it is literally testament to the way that everyone's worked together. It's been a really, really good partnership. Really good. It's been great fun. But why have you guys gone FedRAMP and STIG first rather than CIS? Is there any reason for this sort of stuff? Because we do both side of things. There's multiple benchmarks.
Yeah, I think so, Mark. If I heard you right, the question was, why did we choose to go the STIG route? Yeah, there's a saying amongst the people that I run with here out in the DC area. You always design and build towards the most stringent standard, and then that way everybody else will be perfectly fine. And the fact that you just walked us through the arduous process involved with installing an OS, auditing it, rehardening, patching, installing all the dependencies, rinse and repeat, and then install the app, rinse and repeat. That's a lot of work, and it's not uncommon to find one or two people doing this for a system, right? For an appliance, and spending tens, 20, 100 hours on something like this. So you've done all the work, right? And it sounds like the CI/CD pipeline will continue to pull down the latest STIGs, to apply the latest Noname updates for the next version of whatever appliance we have coming out. But yeah, so we chose the hardest path. And not only was it a really locked down mode that we shot for, we also, I think you remember us saying, whenever we hit a roadblock and there was something with the application that forced the STIG to be turned off, instead of you writing that into the attestation document as, hey, here's an exception, our developers went back and said, no, leave it on, and we will figure out, we'll debug, we'll troubleshoot, we'll figure out what is breaking, why it's breaking, and we will modify our code to coexist with that STIG. And that's a lot of work. And you really need the product development team and the people doing the hardening. You need experts on both sides in order to accomplish that. One more thing I just wanted to comment on, the attestation document. There was a reason why we shot for that. There's a lot of supply chain risk guidance coming out of NIST, NSA, DoD, and some of this is publicly available. But one of the latest documents that's out there talks about for OEM vendors, manufacturers of software products, you must have hardening procedures, security procedures, antivirus, all of these controls in place in your development shop. And you need to have someone who can attest to the hardening of your shop, your product, and really the integrity of all of that, and those security controls around it. And they actually call out in one of those bullet items that you must have a 3PAO FedRAMP assessor look at your product and write a document that attests to the security of that software product and your environment. And so we knew this was coming, and we had the foresight to plan for it, and hence we came up with that attestation document and working with you. So appreciate that.
That's brilliant. It's been great work.
What I would like to know, Edgar, is when we started working with the MindPoint Group folks, we actually had a couple of options to deliver a hardened version of our product, right? One was hey, let's just harden the tarball package and have customers deploy it on their own STIG OS. They can choose whatever OS they want because Ubuntu now has STIGs that you can apply. But instead, we went the virtual appliance route. So I actually personally love virtual appliances, but I'd like to hear your spiel on why we went that route instead of an open iOS platform.
So I think there's a couple of reasons there. First and foremost, it reduced the attack surface of the software itself, plain and simple. Next is time to value for our customers. Just think of every organization you've ever worked with. They likely have a vSphere. They upload the OVA, or whether it's AWS or Azure, you upload the template, and you can be up and running very quickly. So it was important to us that if we do go down this route, customers are able to adopt the solution as quickly as possible. And I think from also from a customer perspective, being the most important thing here is they love the fact that the responsibility of patch management and support for the full stack comes back to the vendor. So again, for the customer, it's again ease of adoption. And lastly, I would say is the parity, being able to deliver on parity with the solution we already had. So we wanted to aim for no loss of functionality so that both our federal and commercial customers and highly regulated markets could all get the same capability simultaneously. And I feel that we've achieved that with the virtual appliance. And now, like you said earlier, as we go in different directions, we either adopting a FedRAMP SaaS platform, we'll be able to again deliver the same functionality across both.
Thanks, Edgar. That's great, man. Yeah, I mean, you hit on a good topic about ease of deployment and management. When you have a tarball and you say, hey, somebody needs to figure out how to deploy Red Hat or the OS Ubuntu, and then somebody needs to install the Docker layer, and then people need to come in and harden it. We need dependencies, and then we can come in and install the package. You could be talking about 4 or 5 different people from different parts of the organization that need to be tasked to do that, and it can take months in some cases, especially in these larger organizations. So having a VM that you can deploy by working with your AWS counterpart or your VMware counterpart, it's super simple.
And maybe a little bit more on the management aspect was the introduction in the creation of the no shell. So I'd love for you to tell people about that and how it helps with the
I'm
management.
actually very, very excited about this feature inside of the appliance. So in order to build, let me just take a step back and tell everyone what no shell is. So you can build a hardened appliance that includes the OS, any middleware that needs to be installed, and then the application layers and all the dependencies. But it doesn't do you any good if, from a security perspective, you give people the rights to come in to it via SSH and start mucking with your settings and configurations. So from a security standpoint, there should be a way so that you can make it where you have control over the full stack that you hardened, and you limit access into that stack, right? Really, it comes down to control, but customers aren't willing to give up control unless they trust you, which is, again, going back to the attestation document, why that's so important. The second piece is simplicity, right? Instead of, I've been on calls where I've had to teach people about Linux commands and how to troubleshoot and tail logs and exec into Docker containers. The no shell was a way in which we envisioned we could make it just easier for customers to manage and operate the platform, right? The full stack, the OS layer, middleware, and the application. As well as updates, right? So, it can be pretty arduous for you to do command line bash shell updating for all of those layers I just discussed. So what no shell offered us was a way in which we could create a shell, a new shell, and we named it, fittingly, no shell for no name shell.
Because of course we did.
Yeah, and what this allows us to do is offer an interface for our customers to come in and via a menu-driven CLI offer up the most common administrative and operational tasks that anyone would want to do against a no-name platform, and that's at the OS layer and at the application layer. We also incorporated some pretty cool logging functionality around auditing what users are doing in the system. Of course, being on the federal side, there's a number of criteria that we have to meet for offloading logs off of the host system onto a SIM or log aggregation point. So all of that was incorporated into the no-name shell. We also had some folks from some cyber protection team and third-party entities pen test our shell to ensure that it was hardened and that no one could break out of the shell and land in the Linux bash or shell part of the system. The shell also offers customers a way in which to easily patch and manage their platform. And again, that's the full stack. What's really even more cool than the shell, though, was we took the liberty of innovating here by putting in a STIG auditing capability. So there's a menu option in that shell that on demand at any time, an auditor of the system, an assessor can hit show me the current posture of this full stack platform, this virtual appliance. And it will print out a report of everything that was stigged and everything that has drifted away from the stig posture. So think about this. You get a pristine version of the virtual appliance that's been hardened with all of these controls. I don't know, what are they, Mark? 700 or so controls via MindPoint Group. They give you an attestation document. But then over time, we provide you with patches and updates for the OS, for the middleware, and the application layer. What's to say that the hardening state of the appliance has not drifted away from the original hardened state, right? Wherein the attestation just doesn't fit anymore. Well, the way that we manage that, and we provide users the ability to monitor and audit against that, is by this audit menu item. So at any time, once you do your patches, your updates, you can run the audit tool, and it will spit out the report of all of the stig controls and whether they've been disabled or not from the initial control points. So again, allows our customers, simply put, to monitor any drift in the hardening of the appliance. And that's a feature that's actually unique to our platform and part of the no-shell. Love it. You're asking great questions around things that I'm very passionate about in this appliance. But what I've been wanting to ask Mark is...
I don't want to let that go, Daren, because
okay,
I think it's that passion and energy that you, Doug, and Dean, and this group, this collaboration has brought. That's ultimately what's serving our customers and the mission, and making us all wildly successful. So,
and you know, to that point, we put this feature into the no-shell because of, you know, the 7 years that I was a contractor on site, and I know what goes into the continuous auditing and monitoring of these systems. I mean, you're shaking you're nodding your head, Mark. I mean, you know, right? I mean, this is these software applications, these stacks are living, breathing things that move and are malleable, and they change. And you know, a lot of the problems that we see and the attacks that we're seeing and issues arising within these systems are just the fact that they've drifted away from their initial posture, right? And so we wanted to get a grip on that.
But that's also a great point from no-shell. So when I was working with the dev team, trying to work out how we can integrate this as possible to the operating system, the way in which it works means that it's consistent in the way it's carrying out acts and tasks. So the consistency across the audit later on down the line will be much, much better, because you're always doing things the same way. It's always expected. You haven't got the element of human error, typing the wrong command or doing the wrong thing or forgetting to go back and change something. The no-shell does it for you. So that menu-driven item means that your risk of actually drifting away is slimmer than it is with human interaction directly. So it was a great thing to work on using the tool we've written in-house. I'd never foresaw this myself personally. And then when me and Daren started chatting, said, can we get this into the no-show? This is brilliant. This is exactly what it's there for. It's very quick, very light, and gives that report back in your hands in literally minutes. It's brilliant. I love it.
And Mark, part of this whole process was also documenting all of this, right? So we at Noname, inside of our documents portal, so we have a way in which we deliver documentation to our customers. We spun up an entire section around this hardened virtual appliance. And then, you know, again, on your side, you folks worked on the attestation document. And I know you touched a little bit on that document, but what will customers get when we provide them the appliance and that document? Can you walk us through real quick the sections of that document?
Yeah, so really shortly in the section of the document, when we run the audit, so the audit is not upstream run-of-the-mill audit. It's an audit we do, which we carried out and written at MindPoint. It's not just to see the configured stateware system, but the running stateware system. So it runs a lot more checks than a normal report would do. So to that end, we have, like you said, we're on about 700 controls we report back on now. So whether it's configured correctly, starts up correctly, and running correctly, we have those 3 different layers just on that one control. So when we get the report back, sometimes we may skip a control because, for example, I don't know, they have a third-party audit control daemon running rather than using the onboard one. So we skip the controls for those ones. Or there's a reliance on audit D being installed. So we can have a skip section, and we'd write down why these items have been skipped. Other ones for some areas where you can't use certain commands without privileges, we would document how we've got around those pieces of work, and documented how we've limited and put mitigations into limit to make sure they are exactly as close to specified as we possibly can get them. Just so when you get a report saying control 11111 isn't compliant, you can turn around to the attestation report saying it's not compliant. Here's the reasons why we made it not compliant, and here's what we've done to mitigate it. So you have a full list of the controls and why we've done it and what we've done to try and limit any risk around there.
And again, typically that would be something done by the customer, right, when they're doing their assessment of the full stack.
Every single one.
So a lot of work's already been done.
It's a lot of work being done.
And Mark, I want to double click real quick on the attestation and those 700 plus digs. Those change as well, right? Like we just had a request recently to go into Azure, and all of a sudden, I think you added on a couple of dozen new controls, and the attestation document got an update. So, real quick, you want to touch on that?
So each platform obviously has its own tools as well. So if you're working on AWS or you're working with VMware or Azure, they have their own tooling that works on their platform. So we have to, when we wrote it again, obviously we've been working with you for months now on these same sort of things and little tweaks we can try and improve consistently and constantly. We've always been trying to make sure we can take the next step. So those tools or those agents that need to run for those platforms can introduce other things that can upset the STIG report. So we've had to write in an area for the STIG report to say, if you're running on this platform, you may come across this one. So if you were to migrate from on-prem into Azure and you've enabled these new features, we can then, in that attestation report, to say you're now on Azure, expect to have these failing as well as if you were on an OVA. So we've had to try and extend that as well. As Noname's grown so quickly, we've grown with the whole documentation. So yeah, that's a really valid point. That each platform is very different and they can have different results.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Mark. And Edgar, we're assuming this system scales, right?
Absolutely. Like I said, as with the aligning to and maintaining parity with the primary solution, we've accommodated the idea of our remote engines, which is essentially gives us the ability to collect traffic from. It allows us to disassociate the main platform parts of it with a remote engine that allows us to process data apart from where the primary software lives, where the UI is, and send the traffic to the primary engine for analysis, or do the entire processing at the remote engine. So which is also hardened. So that's ultimately doesn't sacrifice security, maintains parity with the main solution, and of course the main platform is monitoring the health of the remote engines and maintaining them, keeping them up to date with the hardened central management console.
Great, Edgar. And I know we can incorporate customer side PKI certificates and deploy them very easily throughout this distributed.
100%.
Very excited about that. And the other thing I'm excited about is we just received news last week that we got an ATO to operate within a very large U.S. Department of Defense agency. And it's actually their zero trust framework and architecture that we'll be deploying in. It's called the Application Security Stack, and we're really, really excited to be deployed by the Department of Defense. The fact that we received an ATO or an authority to operate tells us that we've been evaluated, assessed, and very, very scrutinized by the largest DoD agency that's out there. And what we're seeing already is reciprocity for that assessment and the results of that risk assessment between agencies. So we have other agencies sharing their findings and their results and assessment reports with each other. It wasn't easy though. I mean, even after we did deliver the appliance, there was a couple of findings. No one's perfect. The first time around, we did the best we could, but we were 95% there. And what was really cool was when we went back to Mark and the MindPoint Group folks and said, hey, we need this tweaked, we need this added, this changed. You folks were very responsive, Mark. So we appreciate you for the expediting of that, of the poems there. But that allowed us to essentially create everything that the government was asking for, and it was just green check marks across the board when we were done. So super, super excited about being able to deploy within a DoD network. And what this means is we should be, at this point, good enough for any federal civilian agency, federal system integrators. These folks are part of what's called the Defense Industrial Base, so they're pretty stringent on their compliance requirements as well. So, and we're open for business with commercial. So yeah, pretty excited about that. So,
that's great news.
Mark,
I just found that out now, so I'm happy. I'm really happy with that. That's great news.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, that's really the litmus test at the end of the day. Can you get that ATO, right? Can you operate in a real live environment, right? So Mark, now that the hardened appliance has been released, what's next in working with us here at Noname? I know we've been talking about some lifecycle support work and some new development work. We want to look at AWS soon in GovCloud. So, walk us through what's next for all of us.
So we've got ongoing, so STIG, as we know, gets released every quarter. So that STIG could be 1 or 2 controls change, or there could be 100 new controls. So we consistently and constantly working with you guys to make sure that it's updated. We do the testing at MindPoint here as well. So we do the testing, the writing, configuring. We would then obviously say there's a new release out for you guys. We'll still work with you together to make sure that Noname still works consistent with the latest version wherever possible. So that will be a constant ongoing support thing. Like you mentioned, there's new platforms out there. We know there's a new platform, there's new areas that you can deploy this to. So OVA was a great start because it's open virtual appliance, so we can throw it on anything that can take that format. So great, we're going further forward, but obviously some platforms you want to become a bit more cloud native wherever you possibly can. So we're looking at the AWS, we're looking at the Azures, further in line, maybe other platforms, some other providers, GCPs, other cloud providers that can be out there. So we've got a lot more to do, but the way and the speed in which we work and the collaboration we've now got together as a team, and it's not just the Noname team or the MindPoint team. We do have banter when I'm working with the developer team over there and getting things together really, really quickly. All the hours of the day, it's a great working relationship as well. So that's the reasons we're getting these things done as well, because there is a great working relationship there.
We've got a well-oiled machine for sure, and I think we've set the bar pretty high for any other vendor that's looking to do business with Fed. So I'm excited about this. At the end of the day, what we've done is we've proven that this can be done. So thank you, everyone. This has been a pleasure. It's been great speaking with you all, and for all of our audience members and guests here. We look forward to working with you in some capacity, and hope you found this beneficial.
Thank you very much indeed.